celebrate publications from the Prescott campus community. I'm Sarah Thomas, and I'm the Director of the Library and Media Services. First of all, I'd like to thank the committee members. Joanne Evanoff is the chairman, Susie Broad, Pat Watkins, Suzanne Galon, Beth Markley, Kathy Hill, and Evelyn Harris for all of their hard work to produce this program. I would like to thank Mr. John Jenkins and Dr. Shay Jaggard for their collegial support of library programs. We believe that it is important for librarians and faculty to work together to recognize the scholarship that occurs on this campus. The goals of the Scholarly Speaking program are to heighten awareness of research and scholarly activities at the Prescott campus, to promote the library as a supporter of academic endeavors, to encourage and support publications, and to educate the community on the value of scholarly publications. This year we have produced a bibliography with 35 authors, gathered your publications, and created a display. After the program, we will add your publications to the library special collections. The citations were included for the calendar year 2006, only from those authors that provided them. This is not a complete list. There may be other authors that are not included. Right now, I'm excited to present those authors who have works published or papers presented in the year 2006. When I call your name, please come up to the front to celebrate your publications with a gift of recognition. Please hold your applause until the end. Okay, Jamie Beatty, Linguistics and Aviation, Constructing Boundaries of Plagiarism, Male-Female Differences and the Effects in the Classroom. Angela Beck, Adventures in Team Teaching, Integrating Communications into Engineering Curriculum, a unique comprehensive approach for capstone experience, preparing students for professional challenges. Why not eat the fish fillet? Critical thinking and a team-taught university-level course in contemporary ethics. Richard Bloom, our campus law enforcement administrators ready for behavior pattern recognition, challenging the hyperreality of terrorism, current trends in aviation security education, essential source, inessential read, from appeasement to retribution to projection, getting grounded after September 11th, killing and psychology bound, practical applications of scientific profiling, a practical dialogue on concessions, concessionaires, and airport security, psychology in the law and trial, Syriana as our world, Ricardo Carreras, empirical investigation of the role of exchange rates on stabilizing the economic efficiency and open economics. Steve Chadwick, lessons learned from an interdisciplinary engineering course. Milt Cohn, lessons learned from an introductory interdisciplinary engineering course. Audrey Erb, a unique comprehensive approach for capstone experience. Max Vogelman, Boomer, Sooner, and Donders. Tom Galley, lessons learned from an introductory interdisciplinary engineering course. Gary Gear, NASA UAS access to NASA for science missions. Javad Gorjadus, empirical investigation of the role of exchange rates on stabilizing the economic efficiency and open economics, aircraft valuation, and dynamic air transport industry. Audrey is here. Okay, Audrey is here. Audrey Erb, a unique comprehensive approach for capstone experience. Andre Grederson, frequency and surface dependence of the mechanical loss in fused silica. Eileen Groom, Voices of ERAU, 2004-2005, Writing with Purpose. Shigeo Hayashibara, a unique comprehensive approach for capstone experience, preparing students for professional challenges. James Heldling, a unique comprehensive approach for capstone experience, preparing students for professional challenges. Paul Horiljak, lessons learned from an introductory interdisciplinary engineering course. Dorothea Ivanova, towards comprehensive quality control time series of an INSU SSTs for calibration and validation of satellite retrievals, impact of SSE measured ice crystals on the community atmospheric model. David Lanning, a residual fatigue strength of 2024-T4 with foreign object damage. Denny Lassard, identifying impaired positions, keynote address, aviation safety through risk management preparedness, reducing errors through team resource management. Ron Madler, lessons learned from an introductory interdisciplinary engineering course. Alan Malnar, voices of the headland, Robertson Jeffers and the Bird of Prey, doctoral dissertation. Patrick Malcolm, why not eat the fish fillet, critical thinking in the team-taught university level course in contemporary ethics. Nika Nordgraf, constructing the boundaries of plagiarism, male-female differences in the effects of the classroom. 19th Annual Arizona Cowboy Poets Gathering, creative writing, photos from Prescott, range, rhymes, bridge lines, and boundaries. Reflections on Wakansi 2005, Reflections on Wakansi 2006, review of CD covered in crimson. Why do cowboys write poetry? Gary Northam, you've got to attend everything, workload and flying. Aileen Parker, History's Other Faces, Margaret Call's Wind River Mysteries, A pesar de tu silencio, poemas en español y inglés, In Spite of Your Silence, poems in Spanish and English. Ken Parsons, Incorporating Technology in Meteorology Courses. Brian Peacock, whose agenda is this anyway? Robert's Rules of Order. You've got to attend to everything, workload and flying, case studies in ergonomics and musculoskeletal disorders, ergonomics and musculoskeletal disorders, evaluations of synthetic vision systems for controlled flight into terrain prevention, human factors interface issues in unmanned aerial system design, systems in aviation human factors, systems in aviation human factors, boomers, sooner, and donders. Randy Schaefer, lessons learned from an introductory interdisciplinary engineering course, and fundamentals of power electronics with MATLAB. Robert Shanks, a father's story for his children. Mark Sinclair, low frequency variability of extratropical cyclone activity. Bill Smith, a knightly deed well done on turning 60. Richard Tice, Crossing the Library Classroom Border, Narratives of Truth and Consequences in Information Literacy Instruction. Bill Waldoff, No Greater Evil, The History and Legacy of the Grand Canyon Mid-Air Collision of 1956. Ray Yount, a study on the relationship between TV violence and the child's ability to love, according to expectancy value theory. Hannah Zhao, selective encryption for MPEG-4FGS videos, network traffic prediction using least mean kurtosis. Thank you very much. Now I would like to introduce Dr. Shay Jagger, Director of the Center for Teaching and Learning Excellence, who will tell us about our guest speaker today.
Thank you, Sarah. Very impressive introduce our speaker today, Dr. Laurie Richlin from Claremont Graduate University in California. Dr. Richlin received her doctorate in higher education from Claremont, and her dissertation research on alternative faculty scholarship was honored nationally, receiving the Grotsky Award from the American Association of University Administrators. Review her 8-page, 20-page, whatever, curriculum vita, and you will quickly note the long career, interest, and quality work that Dr. Richlin has devoted to faculty, scholarly teaching, faculty and professional staff learning communities, research, and pedagogy. Laurie's most recent publications include Scholarly Teaching and a Scholarship of Teaching, and Preparing Faculty for the New Conceptions of Scholarship. Both of these are in New Directions in Teaching and Learning. And another article, Using CAS, that stands for Classroom Assessment Techniques, by Cross and Angelo. Using CAS to shift the focus from teaching survival to student learning. I first learned of Dr. Richlin's work as the executive editor of the well-respected journal, the Journal on Excellence in College Teaching, and I bought several. We subscribe to this, and you can look through those after the program today directly. Dr. Richlin's work with Dr. Milton Cox of Miami University of Ohio has placed her as one of the top national leaders in faculty learning communities, and she is director of the regional Lilly Conferences on College and University Teaching, which is where I first had the privilege of meeting Laurie. With all the research, writing, national speaking, and editing in national journals, Laurie also helped establish and serve as president of the International Alliance of Teachers Scholars, of which we are a member. I present you a national leader, Dr. Laurie Richlin.
And how do we make this the other? How do we stop this?
Escape button.
Okay, all for button. Got it.
Got it.
All right. Then I can come on down to here. Got it. How did I do capturing the landscape? Well, thank you very much for having me here. I love this part of the country. It's a pleasure to come here. It's been a pleasure today to meet with faculty and with the professional staff here and talk about some of the things you're doing. And as Shay just said, this is extremely impressive what you have done. And I'm going to be talking about what we as editors for scholarly journals about the scholarship of teaching and learning look for. And I have to tell you I'm pretty radical. So there's a lot of leeway, and I will tell you where some of that is as we go along, because I have a rather rigid view of scholarship and how the scholarship of teaching fits in. And I will try to convince you that I am right, and that if you do things this way, you will be happy. Your life will be easier. You will not be driven insane by all these things. I find that to be a very important thing. I am extremely impressed, not just with your work, but with the fact that you have this celebration. And I just look back there at the person who created it. Thank you for doing that, and thank you for having me here. I have, as you can see, some of this works. As you can see, I subtitled this, what editors look for, getting credit for what you do. I will say this again, but I'll say it now. One of the greatest sadnesses that I have as an editor involves the fact that you do such terrific things and there's no way that it's punishable. And I'll let you know why, but we lose a lot of the very good work that you do, and I want to avoid that. So I'm going to start out with an overview of what is scholarly teaching, and then what the scholarship of teaching and learning is, and then how you develop a course or a project that can become a publishable project. Oops. It's going the wrong direction. Here we go. So, some of you already know this, but in 1990, a book came out from the Carnegie Foundation. Everybody say Carnegie? Yes. I spent several years in Pittsburgh. And pronounced that way, and I'll tell you, they have the foundation now out at Stanford University where that's one of their major challenges. That's the name of their organization. The book came out, and it involved what were the appropriate scholarships for the American faculty. The 4 that were identified were discovery, application or practice, integration, and teaching. The problem they ran into is that when they then had a second volume a few years later about how do you know what the quality is on this, they really compounded an early mistake that they had. For the scholarships of discovery, which is pretty much what we think of as laboratory research or looking for new things, for the scholarship of application or practice, which you may be very much involved with since you're a professional organization, you train professional students, they did the same thing. And for the integration scholarship, which is bringing together different ideas and trying to form a cohesive universal, to find out what the quality was, they asked the editors of those journals. So if you think of your disciplinary journals or any disciplinary journals, they asked those people, what do you look for when the scholarship comes in? For the scholarship of teaching, they didn't call it teaching and learning at that point, they looked at student evaluation forms. Now, I spent a lot of time in the biochem lab at MIT, and I know that the Navy came in, NSF came in to evaluate how the science was being done. Were they using the correct recording things? Was the equipment calibrated right? All of the things that you need to know about how something is done. But nobody would have confused that NSF or Navy or whatever made the report with the scholarship of biochemistry. As you know, it would have gone through many other ways of being evaluated before it was called scholarship. So there became this confusion. What is good teaching? What is scholarly teaching? And what then do we call the scholarship of teaching and now in learning? Or some people call it solo. Some people call it silent. I dismiss good teaching. It's whatever activities we do that enable our students to learn. Some of you were born that way. Some of us in the world, that here of course, will never ever be able to help another human being learn something. But most of us are in the middle. We're educable. Now since we're all educators, that's good, we have a market. So any activities that enable students to learn, that's fine. And whether it happens naturally or not, I set it aside, but it's not scholarly or scholarship. To me, scholarly teaching has a couple of points. The first thing is that it is informed by what other people have already found out. My friends in the biochemistry lab would never have gone about looking at the crystal structure of rhenium-4 without knowing what other people had done. It would have been unthinkable. So to go into a scholarship or an investigation into teaching and learning without knowing what others have done in a similar situation or confronted by a similar problem would be, I hope, unthinkable. Of course, we've all done it. The other is that there's systematic observation, and faculty members are usually pretty good at that. But the scholarship of teaching and learning, as opposed to scholarly teaching, is when you place what you find out back into the knowledge base of teaching and learning. And you do that and make it public with a presentation or publication. So what's the relationship? Now, there is not going to be a test on this next one. There's no way you're going to be able to read it from the little 1/3 page that you've got. Just sort of enjoy this whole thing because you're going to get it just fine. There's an ongoing cycle, and it looks like this. See what I mean? You know what it does on this. The most important part of this entire complicated diagram that I have is the upper left-hand corner, where it says you observe a teaching-learning connection problem or opportunity and document the baseline. Well, what is a teaching-learning connection problem and opportunity? Anything that you see in your classroom that you wish were different. The reason we call it problem and opportunity is that those of us in the social sciences and hard sciences love problems because otherwise we wouldn't have jobs. And people in humanities like opportunities. And when you tell somebody in humanities that there is a problem, they get very worried. We are gleeful. They are worried. So we call it an opportunity. And sometimes what you have is an opportunity. And around here I know you're getting a lot of new equipment and there's new technologies. And those present opportunities you didn't have before that you then have to run back and try to find a problem for. This is the cycle at the top of the scholarly teaching, where the first thing you do is you see what other people have done after you have formed the fact that you have some kind of difference you wish to make. You choose what you want to do, you systematically observe what happens, you document it, you analyze it, you obtain peer evaluation, and you check it against the baseline, which of course you can only do if you have one. So the first part of this is the hardest part. And it's difficult because you're professionals. You read the landscape, you make implicit professional decisions. It is not easy to make this explicit, and you do it so quickly. For instance, who has something in a classroom that they wish were different? Something in how their students learn that they wish were different? Anyone? Yeah.
I'm trying to get my students to ask a better analytical question.
Okay. Better. How do you know they're not asking good analytical questions?
I just know.
Of course you do, and I do not doubt this. Now, as I say, my frustration as an editor is she knows this, she'll make a good decision, she'll come up with something, and I'll lose it for any kind of publication. Okay, so let's just think for a moment of what you see. When do the students ask these questions? Is this a verbal thing in class or something they write and bring in?
Verbal.
Verbal. So they're sitting in a classroom and they've read something or you've given them some information and you want them to ask you a good question. What does a good question look like?
Well, I think it goes beyond how many words do we have to do or how many pages do we have to do?
So it's not about process, you want something on the material.
Right.
Okay. What is a good question? I do workshops that take a whole day on designing questions, and that's for faculty members, so how should our students know? What would you like in that question? What connection do you want? What form would it take? You have those process questions, but there are also very low-level questions, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Low-level questions like, what date did this happen on? So there's a way. If you look at the literature, you would find a way of analyzing questions. Actually, in my book, which is right there, I have the whole thing that John Andrews did on different types of questions. And you would say to your students, this is what a good question looks like. Let's try them out. You would train them on it. This is my best suggestion because I've seen this work. And then you would see the questions. But none of this will be useful unless you can capture those original questions. So it's hard to capture things verbally. So you might want them to start bringing in questions, just without any training, without any background. Or you might want them to come into class and sit down, what are your questions today? And they can ask, how many pages, how many references, whatever they want to ask, and you'll get a feeling for the kinds of questions they're dealing with. And then when you do something that will help educate them on what you want, then you can start asking them every time, what questions do you have today, and see if it's made a difference, and see if it's closer to what you want. But without capturing that beginning is, just it, and it's not going to be any use for you to go ahead and do anything about it in a scholarly way. You need to have it. So this is the hardest thing. And usually when I ask faculty, they are not as concise as that. They will tell me students aren't motivated. Well, students aren't motivated is a whole long way from what you're actually seeing and interpreting is that. So you have to try to say, what do I see? Because the only thing you'll be able to see change is something you see. Obviously, consulting the literature, it used to be that you go into databases like ERAU, which is the educational research, and blah, 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 blah. You Google anything these days, and you find what you need. At least a good start to it. choosing and deciding what to do. Faculty are fabulous at this. Looking at it systematically, documenting what you see, analyzing those results. This is where our course portfolio comes in, where you have put this all down and you show what you're doing, and your peers or your colleagues look at this and they say, oh, yes, that makes sense to me. Now, check your results against that baseline and document what you got. Now, you may not have results worth sharing. You may have results that have benefited your students' learning, but it's not something that you're ready to make into scholarship, except as your portfolio. You can demonstrate what your students have done. But if you revert results worth sharing with other people, you can go through identifying the issues, synthesizing, putting this into the context of the knowledge base, and I'll get back to that in a moment. Having a manuscript, submitting it for review, presenting it, and then adding it to that database. Identify key issues, you can see. You can see how to do that. You can do all these things very well. This is the hard part. Putting things, and you've done this in your discipline, putting things into the context of what is already known makes it into the scholarship. Because what you're doing is saying, as happened here, or different from happened there, or has happened here but in a different circumstance, you're somehow integrating what was already known and adding your piece to it. Obviously, you prepare a manuscript, gets reviewed. This was from the old way of doing skating. And since I cannot figure out the new way of looking at figure skating, that's why I'm trying it out. There's no way I'm going to try the other. And then you get it out. Some people have told me that, well, you know, it's good for my students, I've got this, and I have no interest in sharing it with anybody. As I said, I'm a pretty radical person. I think when we sign on as scholars, that's part of what we sign on for. No way would my friends at MIT have found out the structure of Uranium 4 and not published it. Not just because they needed credit for doing it, but because it's part of your obligation, I think, as a scholar, and certainly as a scholar of teaching and learning. And so I'm really just absolutely amazed at the work you've done and gotten out some of these things from your classroom. So you add it to the knowledge base, and it's there then for other people. Okay, how do you develop this? This is what I was saying. Describing the problem is the first piece. Figuring out what you see and getting it back to the first principles. Now, I said what you see in your students' behavior you wish to change, but this has to be connected to a learning objective. It's an honest learning objective in your course. Now, asking the good questions probably connects to something that you want your students to learn. To ask questions and learn at a deeper level. Whatever those, whether it's one of your learning objectives or whether it's many of them that asking better questions will help, this is something you need to connect it to. Otherwise, there's no reason actually to be doing it. The context, very important when you're designing a project to say what is the context. It is here and this is where. Any of you have done a dissertation, especially social science type dissertation where you have a big literature review. What else have they done? Describe what you're going to do. And as I say, at this point, faculty just get that. In fact, a lot of things that I get are, this is what we did, and it's in loving detail. And everybody loved it. There's none of that other stuff. This is where we come in. And this is something I don't really have to worry about, but I just want to make sure you know that, you put this in after you put in the context, and you say, how will you know? How will you know if you have improved things or changed things in any way? And then a timeline. It would be nice if everything that anybody did in any given semester or term, or even class session could be published. But usually, that's not true. Usually, you'll have to have several iterations with different people involved in order to know whether it was just the fact that something different happened, whether it was that particular group of students, that particular time of year. In order to know those things, you'll have to do it more than once. And then these are the categories that we look for, and it's all described online and in the journal, of what we look for. And they're very similar to those original Carnegie descriptions of types of scholarship. Now this is research. This is discovery, and most of what I've been describing, of something you do in the classroom that helps students learn better. You can also do an integration, bringing together various things. Now different disciplines are at different stages as far as the solidity of their paradigm. And if you all agree in your discipline about how things work, then you're not probably going to have to do too much integration. But if you're in a discipline where there are various ways of going about things, then you could possibly bring together and try to find universals within those different ways of doing things. That next one is innovation. Now, a lot of people think innovation is, oh, I've got a good idea, here it is, please publish it. Actually, it isn't. It's all the way up through all of the things you do in the research and discovery, including identifying the problem clearly, including finding out what others have done and coming up with a solution. But that solution and innovation is usually bigger than one classroom. And you need to get out this idea based on your research so that other people can try it and other people can use what you have found to try a new innovation. And then, if you have won a case, which is the Council for Advancement of anyway, whatever it is, it's the big universal award for faculty, and they have them in different categories of institutions. Or you've been chosen the outstanding professor someplace. We would be really interested, and journals are very interested in publishing what your reflections are on this. Unfortunately, and I think it's part of the time we're at, and the retirement of the many young faculty who came in the early and mid-60s into the professoriate, we're getting a lot of, I've taught for 30 years, and here's how you're supposed to teach. You know, your lecture should be like this. This is, you know, and it's a personal thing, and if somebody wants to collect all those and do an analysis, that would be an interesting piece, but unfortunately it doesn't have any basis in anything scholarly about teaching, because all they're saying is this is what I did, and I enjoy doing it, and my students always came back to see you and stuff. That could be a measure, your number of students coming back, but only if you had a baseline somewhere else. So the most important part of your project, as I mentioned before, is that there has to be a learning objective. You have to be trying to change something in how your students learn something you're trying to help them learn. Learning objectives are the key to the universe. They can make your life so simple, they can help your students learn better. Everything that makes teaching more fun and easier comes out of good, clear learning objectives. They're very specific to you and what you're teaching. And they are based on the professor, the students, the environment, and the content in that order. Especially here, where experience in the field makes a difference in so many of your courses. The background that you have had in your field as a professional makes a big difference. You have learning and teaching styles, which I'll mention in a bit. The cognitive level that you're at and your cold preference. Cold is an inventory you can take, and what it really tells you is how do you like to start getting into a field or a knowledge. For instance, think for a moment if I said, okay, your job is to build a doghouse. What is the first thing? Just think for a moment, what is the first thing you would do? I know I've got engineers in this. Now, I'm a parent of an engineer, so I want to always find okay.
Get a dog.
Get a dog. Okay, that is one thing. What would somebody else do?
Consider the size of the dog.
Measure the dog. Okay, that's all interesting. What did somebody else do?
Draw a picture of a dog.
Draw a picture of a doghouse.
And write a poem about a dog.
Write a poem. Right. That's it. Anybody else? else?
Kids will do it for you.
Find the kids to do it for you, okay. Anything else? Yeah?
Understand the weather of that area.
Give a man a hammer. Meteorology, okay. Anybody else have another?
Probably ought to add investigate when I fell apart.
I know, wait, good, that's not part, right? Anything else you do?
Go to PetSmart.
Go to PetSmart and buy one? Okay, all right. Okay, and now if you had any of these people here in your course, you'd be lucky to have such intelligent, interested, dedicated people. But look at how differently they go about something, as simple as this. Now, I have to tell you, I know I said my daughter's an engineer. I am I don't know, house and, you can see my book's called Blueprint for Learning. I'm a house and garden person who knocks down walls and does that sort of thing until I get to the electrical box and I hire someone. But I would go out in my garage and see what kind of wood I had and start putting things together. Who cares what size the document? It occurred to me when I started on this. There's a lot of people who would just Google it. A lot of people who would get online to buy designs. There are a lot of people who would write poems, but other people who would just draw pictures, and they want their dog house, and I've seen this on television, to match their house, so that it looks, So I mean, people start this on, and that's what the call preferences and how you like to go about things is not the same as how your students do. Students usually like to get right into something, and normally what we do is we lecture and then we ask questions and then we let them do it. It would be like if you were teaching piano and people had to be able to do all the theory and everything. You wouldn't want to practice the piano until they could answer all the questions in the lecture. Anyway, there's all these different things that come through. Professional development, like being here today, makes a big difference in who you are. Students have all the same things. They even have lives. And if it's about the students, and it is about the students, then it's about learning. And this is my definition of learning. This is when I talk to you about improving learning objectives, what I mean by learning. Learning is the ability to use information after long periods of disuse and to use it in a context that differs, even if just slightly, from the one it was learned in. In other words, those of you who teach courses where students have to be able to do things, and they learn them in a classroom, this is where it really hits the road or the sky. I've gotten to the point where and I wrote a book in 1995 called Evaluating Teaching, College University Teaching Evaluation Systems, or something like that. We try to look at all these inputs and have people design portfolios and do all sorts of things that told us about their teaching. I've gotten to the point of just saying we should look at people's grade books. If we agree with people on their learning objectives, and if we look at the criteria they have for meeting those, then the more people they can get to do very well, the better a teacher does. And there's nothing else that matters. And that's why I said I'm out there. This is the current cognitive taxonomy that comes out of something called the Bloom taxonomy, and it's extremely important in undergraduate education, but it's also important all the way through life. What we have here are two dimensions, one a cognitive process dimension and one a knowledge dimension. And what we need to know when we're designing a course or designing a project is that if you don't know, you can't remember the factual knowledge, the dates, the weights, anything that people have to know, the formula, then you're not going to be able to apply it anymore. And there is a progression that we have to make sure students go through, and that we do this all together, that we do this, each thing that we do with a student, from setting out the learning objective to setting up a learning experience, whether it's just listening to a lecture or whether it's actually going out and building a doghouse, and then how we evaluate them all matches up. And I've had faculty say, but I'd like my students to stretch on the test. I don't think that's ethical. I think that you can only assess people on something that you've taught them given them a chance to practice, and given them feedback on their practice. Otherwise, you can play gotcha and win, always. So a lot of this remembering comes first, obviously. And understanding means that you can then describe things, not just list them. Application, and this is, in fact, if you go Bloom cognitive taxonomy online, you can get a lot more than even I have listed there for you. Being able to do things only comes after you understand them. And it doesn't come easily. It may come more easily to some of your students, but it doesn't come easily in general to undergraduates to be able to transfer something that they have been able to describe verbally into action. Evaluating is even higher. And so people who like to use debate in their course need to know that until you know something and you can apply it, it's very hard to justify in a debate, to be able to back things up, to critique something. There's one more that I didn't talk about. The other is create. And it's very good for people to be able to create new ideas. And it's something that I know you're working on in some areas here. In order to create, they have to have gone through all the rest of that. Now, that was the cognitive taxonomy. There are two others, and they may impact something you're doing, and they may not. The affective one is a development for receiving experience, being open to experience, to be able to respond to that, to be able to value things, to be able to challenge and refute. That sounds a lot like the judging, but it's actually coming out of the valuing. Conceptualize ideas, and then internalize them. So this is about how people feel about things and how they react to things. The one that you might have even more connection with is the psychomotor. Because the psychomotor is being able to actually do things in eventually a naturalized way and to be able to respond to events. So to internalize things, to be able to first imitate what somebody does, then be able to do it independent of help, and finally to have it so much part of it. I was in the simulator for the Airbus, and looking at all that, it has to be something that people have gone through to a very high level of psychomotor ability to do that. And there is a progression on this. So when we're teaching somebody to get to that level, there are steps that you have to go to. Now, outside of the student and going to the environment, obviously the type of institution, policies and rules you have here make a difference, and how you can design a project, same thing with class size and any kind of technology that's there. Now, I told you about the Bloom level. I'll talk to you about teaching goals and objectives that you need to design your project. This is the cycle, and you can't see it because it's in red. Okay, here's what we do. We stop this. We go into this one. We tell it to select all, and we tell it that we're very interested in light. Actually, okay. Is that better? Yeah. So you go to the top part. Oh, great. Every other one is the okay. Big questions, hopes, and dreams are why you're here. My background's political science. I want everybody to become able to be good citizens, participate in their community, and to have a good life. Whatever you're teaching, there is a higher reason you're doing this, why you're fascinated by this, what you want for your students. The course teaching goals are what area this course is going to cover. The learning objectives are what the students will be able to do afterwards, and then the knowledge base of teaching and learning is where you get that information to become a scholarly teacher and get through all these little weird ones. So the first one we have is, what are the big questions? Where does this fit in the curriculum? Why, what do you want your students to get from this? These belong to you, teaching goals belong to you. I want students to understand the importance of. I want students to enjoy. My favorite one is from a faculty member at St. Olaf College who wanted her students to love medieval poetry. Now you can't grade that. It may not even be ethical to grade love. But that was what her goal was for the class. To translate that into something else, she had to say what the students would be able to do by the end of the class. Students completing this course will be able to. These belong to the student, and this is really your contract with them. And it's all you have to do, is just help them learn to do those things. So after you thought about this, you list these clear, observable things. After completing this course, students will be able to. And you can't see it, but these are those blue things with all the different verbs that you have. And this is how you would do it. If it were the beginning thing, you'd say be able to define. If you go higher, then you describe. And you go up using this. Then you can choose a learning experience. And this is your intervention. This is your new idea. See how long it's taken us to get there? All that has to be thought about and gotten down first for it to be useful. And then finally, how will you know? Now, it can be very simple. What you have, if what you want your students to be able to do is to be able to list the 5 most influential psychologists in the 20th century, then you'll have a test question, and I bet everyone could write. You would say, list. It's very simple. And somewhere in between, your students would have done something that could have been listening to a lecture, could have been reading a book, it could have been watching you up on your table dressed as Freud declaiming. It could have been anything that you did. In between there is your learning experience. That's where the creativity comes in, and that's where your good ideas that you have that you want to start out with, because you thought about all this but you haven't made it explicit, come in. So this is where the fun is, and this is where teaching tips come in. Teaching tips aren't scholarly, they're just somebody's good idea. So when you do a presentation, obviously your presentation objectives, people in this room today, you all, at the end of this session will be able to. We have activities, which is mostly my talking. There's citations that you would have, that you would say this is where this comes out of, and a description, at least the Lilly conferences, is 75 words. Sometimes they want less, sometimes they want pages. For a manuscript, you look at the call for manuscripts. Now, I gave you the overview of the call for manuscripts for the journal. We look through something in those 4 categories. You prepare it, you submit it for review, you get feedback, and you do revisions. Only one paper we started in 1990, so I think we're on volume 18 now. Only one paper has ever been accepted without revisions in all that time. So there's revisions. And then, depending upon where you're publishing, there's copyright, there's promotion, PR on all of this, so that you can get this word out to people, you can get your ideas out to people. Now, journals don't pay you. On the other hand, this kind of journal doesn't charge you. There are journals that charge you. Any of you who are in scientific things know that sometimes you charge students to charge you for that. I don't know how much we're able to do now that we have such good computer programs that we can give people the charts made up, but it used to be that you would get charged for these things. Books you get paid for. I wrote a chapter on professional education, scholarship for faculty in professional schools. And I got 1/2 of 1/13 to 70% of the profits for several years. First year was $59. 1/2 of 1/13 was because there were 13 chapters and I co-wrote it. Actually, I was a graduate student, so I wrote it. And 70% of the profits, the editors got 30% of the profits. And so I got 1/13 for the 15 chapters of 70% of the profits. I noticed that I had something that Josie Bass sent me from a couple of years ago. And I worked my way up. First of all, it was $59, and then it was $12. And then there started to be returns. They never came after me, but now I've worked my way back up to $8.50. And I think they don't send you anything to that $10. So a couple more years, you go out and buy it. It's a really, the other authors were absolutely fantastic on the things that they did, called Educated Professionals. It's got a lot of really good things in it besides that piece. So they get that. The book, they actually send me money. I'm waiting for it this month to see how we did. But, you know, there's not, it's not, unless you write something, you know, the textbook of all time or the book of all time, like the classroom assessment technique book, then, you know, this is not going to pay for anybody's college education. So the publication is a process. And anybody who's ever taught writing knows that you don't teach writing, you teach rewriting. And that's exactly what this process is. So you get credit for what you do by documenting the learning, by presenting the findings, and we like to have people present so they get feedback and then can make their publication. I'd like you to be familiar with this Richard White quotation, Richard White's book, By Design, out of Harvard. You can't say by analysis, but you go with by design. Without a baseline, it doesn't matter how many statistics you run on your results. You have to have that. But it's pretty easy if you design it well from the beginning, that you just go right through and say how things change. I know that we have just a few moments, and you may have questions, you may have specific questions, so I'd like a couple of moments to answer that, and I will be available afterwards too. Does anybody have a particular project you're thinking about, or a question on any kind of these processes? Yes, sir.
Is there any type of concordance that lists all the professional journals?
Several.
In what way?
Several. There's a couple of things. There are websites, because everything changes so quickly, of several centers for teaching and learning that list them overall. There's not a lot of interdisciplinary ones, but the disciplinary ones. And we just published an article, the Preparing Future Faculty Fellows that I work with did research a year and a half ago on the status of scholarship of teaching and learning in the disciplines, and looked at the journals. What is your field?
Literature.
Literature. Scholarship, just put SOTL, Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, Literature. It pops up. I mean, you can do anything on Google, but websites, a lot of the faculty development websites have lists by the discipline on this. And I would say SOTL, or Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, Literature, you might get all sorts of things and have to refine your keywords, but I'm sure that Shay can find, I think Hawaii, Manoa, I guess it's hawaii.edu, has an incredible website that has a lot of those. Yeah, they were doing great that. And you can look at those and look what they ask for as far as length and all the rest. You can publish the same thing in something that refers just to your discipline and then make it broader to look at what the repercussions would be for others. It's not the same exact article, right? But it would be a different slant on the same information, some of it more specific to your discipline, some of it more generalizable to everybody who teaches. Other questions?
I have one for you. One of the engineering education journals recently changed their policies. Now, any article that's submitted, you have to have assessment data in there that validates whatever you're talking
Yes.
about.
Yes.
And the difficulty with that is, especially for courses that are taught once a year, you now set it up so it's going to be it's a minimum multi-year effort to try to get a baseline and then get 2, 3 one or two other data points after that.
Absolutely, and so you have some choices there. First of all, it reminds me of the person who said, you know, I want to learn to play the piano, but it'll take 10 years and I'll be 40 by then. And the answer, of course, is you're going to be 40 anyway. The question is whether or not you're going to be able to play the piano. So you'll be teaching these courses, and whether or not you set up a longitudinal study and do that and get your baseline and do it, you know, you're still going to have taught them for 3 or 4 years. If you have it organized and that's useful, then good. The other is to find a comparison group. To find somebody else who's teaching something similar, someplace else or someplace very different, someplace very similar. You probably have a very limited number of those, but you probably know who they are, and see what they're doing, and see if you have a comparison group, at least to begin with. Or you could do the innovation piece, which is do all of that background, come up with what the innovation is going to be, and send it out to the world to do that, and meanwhile be collecting your information. But yes, the journals are getting tighter onto this scholarly kind of publication. It's no more teaching tips. What we looked at across the disciplines were whether the main disciplinary journal published something, whether there was a separate teaching psychology, teaching sociology, you know, whatever it is in your group, whether they had a separate journal, whether at their main conferences they had presentations on teaching and learning in the field, or they had a separate one, and whether what was in the actual journals were teaching tips or actually scholarship of teaching and learning. And people are moving away from the teaching tips, but it's still most of what you're going to find out there is we did this and everybody loved it. And with none of this beginning and end. The problem, as I say, are never the ends, it's the beginnings. They kill me. But I can't publish it because there's no beginning. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much for having me in this beautiful place.
Thank you for coming today, and we look forward to seeing you next year.
In our new library.
Yay!